Io ci andrò nel bus.
Ah, sì, sì, benissimo. Bene, poiché il tempo che abbiamo...
We don't actually have much time ahead of us this afternoon, so I thought that I would recite a very brief prayer which the older of you might well remember. It's in Latin.
Actiones nostras quesumus Domine, aspirando preveni et adiuvando prosequere, ut cuncta nostra oratio et aperatio, a te semper incipiat et per te cepta finiatur. Per Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. Allora, la relazione.
This afternoon's speaker, maybe last but not least, but it's still a very interesting subject, is communication to all people. And our speaker is Dott.ssa Valentina Alazraki. She's well known in the Vatican and is a communications expert, and she is known by us very well. She's a journalist and a writer from Mexico. She's a correspondent of Televisa, which is the major Mexican television. She's their correspondent in Rome and has been so since 1974. As a journalist, she began working, and she was very, very young, with Pope Paul VI in 1974. And she's covered all the pontificates from then on. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis. She has made about 150 trips abroad accompanying our popes. So she is a person who knows our world and communications in our world very well. And I think that she is the right person to talk to us in the light of her experience and tell us what the requirements and expectations are if we want transparent communication with the rest of the world. Thank you very much, Valentina. You have the floor. Good afternoon, everybody. You Eminences, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to read the first part of my presentation because I have just been introduced already. I have been invited to talk to you about communication and how it's so important to have transparent communication in order to combat any kind of abuse. I have very little in common with the rest of you at first sight. I'm a lay woman. I don't have any particular position in the church, and to boot, I am a journalist, and you are bishops and cardinals. Nevertheless, we do share something very powerful. We all have a mother. We're all here because one day a woman gave birth to us. Compared to you, I might have additional privilege. I'm a mother too, first and foremost. Therefore, I don't feel that I'm just representing journalists, but I'm also representing mothers, families, civil society, and I would like to share with you my experiences and my life, and if you will allow me to add some practical advice. That's why my point of departure is motherhood. I'd like to begin with that in order to develop the topic I'm to talk to you about, how the church should communicate about topic of abuse. I doubt that anyone in this hall does not think that the church is first and foremost a mother. Many of us present here have or have had a brother and a sister. Let us also remember our mothers. She would love us all in the same way, but she would be more devoted to the frailest, weakest children, to those perhaps did not know how to move ahead in life and needed a little push. For a mother, there's no such thing as a first or second-class children. There are stronger children and there are more vulnerable ones. And I know this because I'm a mother. Nor are there first and second class, or there shouldn't be first and second class children for the church either. Has seemingly more important children like you, bishops and cardinals, and I wouldn't dare to say the Pope, are no more than any other boy or girl or young person who has experienced the tragedy of being the victim of abuse by the priest. So what is the Church's mission? Well, obviously to preach the gospel. But to do so, the Church needs a moral guide. Coherence between what is preached and lived is the basis for being a credible institution, worthy of trust and respect. For this reason, in the face of such a criminal conduct as the abuse of minors, don't you think that an institution like the Church can have any other way, if not that of reporting a crime? Can the Church have any other way, if not that of being on the side of the victim and not that of the offender? Who is the weakest? The priest who abused, the bishop who abused and covered it up, or the victim? You can take it for certain that for us journalists, mothers, families, and all of society, the abuse of minors is one of the main causes of anguish. The abuse of minors, the devastation of their lives, etc., are our worst nightmare. We believe such abuse is one of the most abominable crimes. So ask yourselves, are you the enemies of the abusers and those who cover them up? We have decided which side we're on. Have you done so truly or just in word? If you're against those who commit or cover up abuse, then we are on the same side. We can be allies and not enemies. We will help you to find the rotten apples and to overcome resistance in order to separate them from the healthy ones. But if you do not decide in a radical way to be on the side of the children, mothers, families, civil society, then you're quite right to be afraid of us, because we are going to be your worst enemies. Because we journalists seek only the common good. I've been covering the Vatican for almost 45 years. 5 different pontificates, extremely important for the life of the Church and of the world, with their lights and shadows. In these 4 decades, I have seen everything. And you must believe me, I truly have seen it all. How many times have I heard that the scandal of abuse is the press's fault? That there's a plot by certain media outlets to discredit the Church, that there are hidden powers backing it in order to put an end to this institution? We journalists know that there are reporters who are more thorough than others. We know that. And there are other media outlets more or less dependent on political, ideological, or economic interests. But in no case can you blame the mass media for having uncovered, exposed, or reported abuse. Abuses against minors are not rumor nor gossip. They're crimes. I remember the words of Pope Benedict XVI saying during the flight to Lisbon, when he told us that the greatest persecution of the Church came not from external enemies, but from within. I would like you to leave this hall with the conviction that we journalists and neither those who abuse nor those who cover up. Our mission is to assert and defend a right, which is a right to information based on truth in order to obtain justice. We know that abuse is not limited to the Catholic Church. You can find it in school, sport, home. But you must understand that we have to be more rigorous with you than we are with others because of the moral role you play. For example, stealing is wrong. But if the person stealing is a police officer, it's even more serious because he's doing the opposite of what he's supposed to do, which is to protect the community from thieves. If a doctor or a nurse poisons their patients rather than taking care of them, then that draws our attention even more because it goes against their ethics, their professional code. As a journalist, as a woman and a mother, I would like to tell you that we think abusing a minor is as contemptible as is covering up the abuse. And you know better than I do that these abuses have been covered up systematically from the ground upwards. I think that you should become aware that the more you cover up, the more you play ostrich, and fail to inform the mass media and thus the faithful in public opinion, the greater the scandal will be. If someone has a tumor, it can't be cured by hiding it from your family or friends. Silence will certainly not make it heal. In the end, it will be the best treatment that will prevent metastases and lead to healing. Communicating is a fundamental duty because if you fail to do so, you automatically become accomplices of the abusers. By not providing the information that could prevent these people from committing further abuse, you are not giving the children, young people, or their families the tools to defend themselves against new crimes. It's like a contagious illness. If you have an illness that is contagious and you don't let the people know who you come into contact with, you're certainly not helping them. On the contrary, these people will inevitably become infected, and that's what you're doing. The faithful do not forgive the lack of transparency, because that is a new assault on the victims. Those who fail to inform encourage a climate of suspicion and incite anger and hatred against the institution. I have seen this with my own eyes during Pope Francis's journey to Chile in 2018. There was no indifference. There was indignation and rage for the systematic concealment, for the silence, for the cheating of the faithful and their suffering, and the victims who for decades had not been heeded and were not believed. Victims have first and foremost the right to know what has happened and what you have done in order to distance and punish those who have committed abuse. Even if the guilty party has died, the victim's pain is not extinguished. Although the guilty party can no longer be punished, of course, at least the victim, who perhaps has lived many years with that hidden wound, can be consoled. In addition, other victims who remain in silence will maybe dare to come out, and you will promote their healing and their consolation. In Spanish, we have a saying that he who strikes first can land 3 strikes. Obviously, we're not talking about striking people here, but of informing. I think it would be healthier, more positive, and more helpful if the Church were the first to provide information in a proactive and not a reactive way, as normally happens. You should not wait to respond to the legitimate questions from the press or from the people, your people, when a journalistic investigation uncovers a case. In the age in which we live, it's very difficult to hide a secret or a scandal. With the prominence of social networks, the ease of posting photos, audios, and videos, and the rapid social and cultural changes, the Church has only one course: to concentrate on awareness and transparency, which go hand in hand. Report things when you know them. Of course, it won't be pleasant, but it is the only way. If you want us to believe you when you say From now on, we will no longer tolerate cover-ups. The first to benefit from transparency is the institution itself, always, because the focus is then on the guilty party. And now, learning from past mistakes. I'm a Mexican, and I can't fail to mention perhaps the most terrible case that happened in the church, that of Marcial Maciel, the Mexican founder of the Legion of Christ. I witnessed this grim case from the beginning to the very end. Aside from the moral justice over the crimes committed by that man, who according to some was mentally ill and to others an evil genius, I can assure you that at the basis of that scandal, which did so much harm to thousands of people, to the point of marring the memory of one who is now a saint, there was an unhealthy communication. You must not forget that in the Legion there was a fourth vow, so that if a legionary saw something that he was uncertain about regarding a superior, he could neither criticize, much less comment about or tell anybody about it. Now, without this censure, without this total concealment, had there been transparency, Maciel would not have been able for decades to abuse seminarians and to have 3 or 4 different lives, wives, children, who in the end came to accuse him of having abused his own children. For me, this is the most emblematic case of unhealthy, corrupt communication from which we can and should and must learn many lessons. Pope Francis told the Courier that in other eras, in addressing these subjects, there was ignorance, lack of preparation, disbelief. I would dare to add that there was also corruption. Behind the silence, the lack of healthy, transparent communication, quite often there is not only the fear of scandal, concern for the institution's good name, but there's also money, compensation, gifts, permits to build schools and university, perhaps in areas where construction is not permitted. I'm talking about what I have seen and thoroughly investigated, and I'll never forget it. Pope Francis always reminds us that the devil enters through our wallets, and he's absolutely right. Transparency will help you to fight economic corruption. And in processing internal information from the ground up, this is internal communication, we have also learned, thanks to many prelates and nuncios, and I can testify to this personally because I've met them and spoken to them, that there have been cases of corrupts. Obstacles are barring access to the Pope of the time, underestimation of the gravity of the situation and information, or a discrediting of it as if it were the fruit of an obsession or imagination. And those are the people who would have provided faithful information. Transparency will therefore also help you to fight corruption in the government. It was also thanks to some courageous victims and several courageous journalists, and I think I must say to a courageous Pope like Benedict XVI, that this scandal was made public and the tumor finally removed. It's extremely important to learn this lesson and not to repeat the same mistake. Transparency will help you to be coherent with the gospel message and put into practice the principle according to which in the church no one is above the law. We are all accountable to God, and we are all responsible towards others.
Therefore, I think we need to avoid secrecy in the sense of an excessive tendency towards secrecy, because unfortunately it is very much related to the abuse of power. It is today that our societies have adopted transparency as a general rule, and the public believes that the only reason not to be transparent is the wish to conceal something negative or corrupt. This secrecy is like a safety net for those who abuse power. My feeling, after all these years, is that within the church there is still a lot of resistance to recognizing that the problem of abuse exists and that it is imperative to address it with all the instruments possible. Some believe that it happens only in certain countries. I believe, and I think it's quite obvious here, I believe that we can speak of a generalized situation to a greater or lesser extent, which in any case must be dealt with and solved. Those who hide something are not necessarily corrupt, but all corrupt people are hiding something. Not all those who keep secrets are committing an abuse of power, and yet all those who abuse power are generally hiding things. Of course, transparency has its limitations. You've repeated this several times here, and it is for this reason that we do not expect you to inform us of just any accusation against a priest or any old allegation. I mean, we understand that there can and should be prior investigation, but it's important to proceed quickly, to comply with the laws of the country you live in, and if envisaged, present the case to civil justice. If the allegation is shown to be credible, then you must provide information about the ongoing processes, about what you're going. You must say that you've removed the guilty party from his parish or where he's been practicing. You should say this yourselves, both in the diocese and in the Vatican. At times, the Bulletin of the Holy See Press Office provides information about a resignation without explaining the reasons. There are priests who have gone immediately to inform the faithful that they were ill and not that they were leaving because they committed abuse. I think that the news about the resignation of a priest who has committed abuse should be released with clarity and explicitly. In Camera Caritatis, silence on these topics is permissible only if it injures no one, but never when that silence can harm someone. And now, I take the liberty to provide you with 3 practical tips for living transparency in communication. I said earlier on that I think communication is absolutely crucial to solving the problem. Now, allow me to suggest 3 points, 3 ways for you to put transparency into practice when communicating about the sexual abuse of minors. The first is put the victims in first place. If the Church wants to learn how to communicate about abuse, her first point of reference must be the victim. Pope Francis asked the participants of this meeting before coming to Rome to meet the victims, to listen to the victims and make themselves available to them. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand to see who's actually done this, but do think about this and answer the question in silence. Victims are not mere numbers, they're not statistics, they're people whose lives, sexuality, emotions, and trust in other human beings, perhaps even in God, has been ruined, not to mention their ability to love. And why is this important? Why is it so important to encounter the victims? Well, because it's really difficult to inform and communicate something about which we have no direct knowledge. In the case of abuse, this is even more obvious. We just cannot speak about this subject if we haven't listened to the victims, if we haven't shared their pain, if we haven't touched the wounds that abuse have caused, not only in their bodies, but also in their minds, in their hearts, and in their faith. If you meet them, these victims, these survivors will have a name, they'll have a face, and the experience you have with them will be reflected not only in the way in which you confront the issue, but also in the way in which you communicate about this and solve it. In the press conferences of the past few days, everyone has stressed the way in which the testimonies that they heard here moved them very deeply and changed them almost. And I think this is absolutely necessary because it creates this empathy and sensitivity which is so necessary to address the issue and solve it, especially. The Pope has told us that he meets the victims regularly at Santa Marta and that he considers this one of his priorities. I think you should do the same. I don't believe you have less time than Pope Francis. Remember, transparency is showing what you do. Only if you place the victims in the first place will you be credible when you say that you have decided to eradicate the scourge of abuse.
Punto. Déjense aconsejar.
Second point, allow yourselves to seek advice. Before making decisions, seek advice from people with good judgment who can help you. There should always be communicators among these advisors. I think that the Church should have at all levels communications experts and should listen to them when they say that it's always better to inform than to keep silent or even lie. It's an illusion, as I said before, to think that today a scandal can be hidden. It's like wanting to cover up the sky with a finger. You just can't do it. It's no longer acceptable nor admissible. And that is why all of you have to understand that silence is far more costly than facing reality and making it public. I think that it's essential that all ecclesiastical structures invest in communications with highly qualified and experienced individuals in order to address the demands for transparency in today's world. The figure of the spokesperson is crucial. Not only must it be a highly trained individual, but he or she must also be able to rely on the full trust of the chief, so to speak, the boss, the bishop, or the cardinal, and have direct access to him 24/7. Because we're not talking about a 9-to-5 job. Everything or anything can happen at any point in time, and the spokesperson must always have this direct access to the person. We journalists prefer to speak directly with a boss, but we do accept speaking with a spokesperson if we know that the person has access to the boss and will pass on what the boss is thinking. I'm saying this because over 45 years, I've observed many ways of communicating, and I've had many different ways of communicating with the pontiffs, and we've realized how important it is to communicate directly. And now, how to make communications professional. It's really important to communicate better. What kind of transparency do journalists and mothers and families and the faithful and the public opinion expect from an institution like the Church? I think it's fundamental that at every level, from the parish up to here in the Vatican, there be structures that might be standardized, but that should be very flexible, agile, and that quickly offer accurate information. It could be incomplete. Incomplete information because a deeper investigation hasn't been carried out yet, but the response cannot be silence or no comment, because then we will just look for the answer by asking others. And so it will be third parties informing people in the way that they want to inform people. So if you don't have available all the necessary information, if there are doubts, if there's an investigation going on, then it's best to explain it in the best possible way so as to not give the impression that you just don't want to answer because you're trying to hide something. It's really important to follow up on the information at all times, and especially it is really important to react quickly. I insist on this point because if you don't inform quickly and in a timely manner, the response will be given too late, and others will step in and maybe provide an inaccurate piece of information. So it's best for you to do it in a correct way and as quickly as possible. the risk is very high, and the price for this kind of conduct is even higher. Silence gives the impression that the allegations, be they totally false or maybe true, or maybe partly true and partly false, if you answer with silence, everyone will be left with the idea that those accusations are truthful, that they're founded. And if you don't answer, we journalists will think that you're afraid. You're afraid of being proven untrue immediately after you give your answer. I have seen with my own eyes, and I said this before, about how bad information or inadequate information has caused terrible damage, harmed the victims and their families, and has not allowed justice to be served, and it has caused the faith of many people to waver. I think that Pope Francis has really experienced this firsthand with the case of Chile and felt compelled to apologize. And that's why this lack of information is important, because he made decisions that he then felt were not good. So I really do believe that the responsibility at stake is enormous here. I assure you that investing in communications is a very profitable business. It's not a short-term investment. It's a long-term investment. I'd like to conclude this presentation by mentioning a different topic than that of the abuse of minors, but important for a woman journalist like myself. I think that we've all realized that we're at the threshold of another scandal, that of the nuns and women religious who are victims of sexual abuse by priests and bishops. The Osservatore Romano's Women magazine has reported on this, and also Pope Francis, during his flight back from Abu Dhabi, acknowledged that there is work underway on the subject, and it has been going on for some time now, and there is a will to do more. I would like that on this, or for this time, for the Church to play on the offensive and not defensive, as has happened in the case of the abuse of minors. It could be a great opportunity for the Church to take the initiative and to be at the forefront when it comes to reporting on these forms of abuse, which are not only sexual, but especially abuse of power. I'd like to take my leave by thanking Pope Francis for having expressed his gratitude before the Curia last December for the work of journalists who have been honest and objective in uncovering predatory priests and who have made victims' voices heard. I really do hope that after this meeting you'll go home and not avoid us, but seek us out. May you return to your dioceses thinking that we are not the terrible wolves, but on the contrary, that we can actually join our forces to fight against the real wolves. Thank you.